Hi guys, welcome to Academic Norms with Beth and Eric.
Hi.
Our learning target today is that we can teach students and parents the academic norms of Valley View Middle School. Warning, we're doing this in one take, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, you gotta live with it.
Essential question, what does assessment look like as Valley View transitions towards more standards-based grading?
All right, so if you're doing the screencast, you're gonna pause here in a minute and walk through these sentence stems and just think about in your head or write down how you would finish these statements. So go ahead and pause and take a second. All right, welcome back. Focusing mostly on the third sentence stem, right? My classroom policy on reassessments is, one of the points of this presentation is to look at the number of divergent reassessment policies we have in our school and think about academic norms and how we could create a cohesive middle school experience, common expectations to put everybody on the same page, create clarity for staff and students and parents, and help guide us towards our middle school vision, right? So Darth Vader doesn't like our lack of clarity. It's disturbing on reassessments. We gathered that in our committee that started last year where we talked about academic norms, right? So how did we gather these norms? We had a committee that was voluntary last spring where we looked at a number of issues, mostly reassessments, talking about the 50% floor on grades, late work policies, things like that. A few conversations that came up on the committee, just to identify kind of the main topics of conversation, ranged anywhere from understanding, that Valley View teachers really support reassessments and they find value in them, but at times they're frustrating and they can be abused by students. Understand the 50% floor policy makes a lot of sense to staff, but also is difficult to navigate. And then our late work policies, making sure that we're on the same page. All those were conversations that came up in this committee as we met 3 or 4 times last year. So what did we do with those? We developed rough draft norms, and then we presented some of those in the spring and got feedback. And then over the summer, leadership refined those, and ultimately this will be presented to parents, it's being presented to staff, and hopefully students as well. Before we dive too deeply, a few key terms that we're going to take a moment to look at. So again, I want you to pause this for just a few seconds and think in your head, how would you define standards-based grading? How do you define traditional grading? And what are power standards and essential outcomes? So go ahead and pause it. Okay, welcome back. The key here with these terms that we're going to use is we want to make sure we have a clear definition. If we look at traditional grading, right on the far left, this idea of a bell curve, right, where we teach information to students in a set amount of time, where time is constant, and then the amount that sticks for them is variable. We're all getting an assessment on the same day, on the same content, and if you mastered it, you get an A. If you didn't, you might get an F, and anywhere in between. But we're looking as learning is variable, right, and time is the constant. All the way over to the opposite side, where standards-based grading looks at a student and pairs them up against a criterion, a standard, something that every kid is expected to achieve. So the learning is constant, and the time is a variable. We're shifting, education is shifting, Edina is shifting, Valley View is shifting to the right on this, where we say it's not acceptable for students to not learn criteria and content. If we say it's important, then they need to learn it. So with that in mind, the grading committee dove into this topic of reassessments.
All right, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of reassessment. The big key here is that all students will master the essential outcomes that are identified in each unit of study. We can be flexible with the time and manner in which this is done. So our essential outcomes are our standards, our power standards. Not everything can be essential. We are going to say that every kid is guaranteed what we are identifying as essential, and you've done that in your PLC groups, and we're going to say 70% is that minimum standard. They need to get 70%. This does not mean that we're lowering our expectations and we're guaranteeing every kid an A.
So all students, again, are going to master the outcomes, the essential outcomes, right? That's a guarantee. And as you see the underline here, we can be flexible with the time, right? The time in which we assess or reassess. So let's talk about some examples that we've gleaned from staff in the building. So one example, you could have all your students assess at the same time, right? In a traditional format, whether that's Scantron and traditional assessment, however that looks. But how do we make that accessible where the essential outcomes are accessible to students? So one example could be this. We could look at a summative that, let's say, worth 60 points, where we know that some of the questions that deal with the essential outcomes, the power standards, are given more weight. So in this assessment, each of these first 10 questions is worth 4 points. Right, so that guarantees that the essential outcomes, right, the power standards and those questions that are aligned with them are going to boost kids up towards that 70% range. Maybe questions that don't deal with those essential outcomes or power standards is worth 2 points. Maybe as they get more and more challenging or more difficult and less critical to know, they're worth 1 point. But at any rate, all students are assessing at the same time, but we're guiding them and creating a path where they can all achieve at least the power standards. Maybe we use a different model, the math model. Math teachers in the district have taken to using level 1 assessments where they use Schoology or Moodle, and they have power standards based assessments that students can take as many times as they want to, over and over again, until they can demonstrate that they've mastered the essential outcomes for a given unit. Students then will, in a class, take assessment that extends that learning, but in that sense, every student is guaranteed a level 1 mastery of essential outcomes. Another model that we could get to is where students only assess when they're ready. Right? The traditional model says all kids are testing on the same day, but one of the questions we might ask ourselves is, why do we need to do that? If we think kids learn at different times, and we understand that, then why would we test all kids at the same time? There's plenty of other ways that we could be variable with our time. These are just a few examples, and we'll continue to think of new ones as we move forward in this journey.
The other way that we can be flexible is with the manner in which we are testing. So this is where we're talking about traditional testing, where everybody's taking a paper pencil test all at the same time, versus project-based learning, or even student-designed assessments, where students look at a rubric that is made and they say, well, I think I could show this outcome using this type of assessment. And they would work with the team of their teacher and themselves to create an assessment. We can be looking at individual versus group assessments. And also, we need to explore the idea of lower level thinking versus higher order thinking. The emphasis being that we will allow students to go above and beyond and extend their learning and continue learning when appropriate, and not just cap them in a multiple choice test. So in summary, students who achieve the essential outcomes the first time, okay, this is kind of the nuts and bolts, 70% or higher, can't retake. We do not want students to take tests over and over again when they're at the 85%. So as a rule at Valley View, 70% or higher, you're not doing a retake. Retakes must be different than the first version. So what that means is you can't just give them the exact same test and test everything again. The second one needs to be targeted for the essential outcomes. And since it's targeted, it's going to seem shorter and thus allow for a 70% cap in the second demonstration.
Just an additional thought on that. One of the things the grading committee recognized is that it feels a little bit cruel to tell a student that they'll reassess and they need to do the exact same content, but because they didn't learn it as fast as other students did or in the time frame that we set forth, they could only get a C. So again, just to reiterate, that's why we're saying they can get a C, but they have to take a reassessment that's different, that's focused only on the power standards. Not right now, Chad Schwartz.
Number 3, students using additional assessment opportunities can and should be required to demonstrate evidence of new learning prior to taking any additional assessment. So what does that mean? They can be attending a WIN session. They can be working on a tutoring with you. They can come in during flex time and have a coaching session. We shouldn't just let them test and test again without showing any effort in learning towards the new targets. Grades. So in a traditional grading sense, meeting essential outcomes is going to guarantee a grade of 70%. That is what we marked as our passing a class. In a standards-based grading system, meeting essential outcomes would mean a student meets all the power standards, and not all the standards. They're meeting the most important. That is our 70%. Nuts and bolts of reporting. All grades this year will be reported in Campus. So those of you that are piloting standards-based might be using Mastery Connect. We still need to be in Campus and showing student progress every 2 weeks. So our parents will have one place to go that they can look and see that progress no matter who their teacher is. As far as late and incomplete work, we have good, exciting news. Yay! The confusion of the 50% floor for grading is now a moot point. So let's look at why. Okay, we are going to mark late or incomplete work as incomplete. That's an I. That will calculate to an F in the grade book. That is absolutely okay. Why is it okay? It's showing that it's a not yet. We're saying it's incomplete. We're not accepting 50%. If we say we put it at 50%, then that means we're okay with it, and we're not. So if they are failing or if it's late, we are going to put that I in and go into reassessment mode, which you can read about in the previous slides. The other piece that does for us is when we put the late work in as incomplete, it's going to impact the student grade. The benefit of that is that our parents are going to be able to see, our teachers are going to be able to see that this is impacting the student. And as a teacher, we can say, this is a problem. I need to work with the student during win time to make sure that we are getting this done and guaranteeing those standards. If you'd like some more information on late work, you can read this Shimmering Nugget, which is an article by Tom Shimmer. And he emphasizes that standards-based grading, which is where we are going as a school and as a district, is a model that uses grades to reflect learning of standards. Thus, when we're just reflecting the learning of the standards, it's a strong recommendation that you accept summative late work without penalty. So please take that into account when grading this year, because this is where we are going into the future.
So a big thanks to the grading committee for their hard work looking at these issues. This certainly isn't set in stone, right? We continue to monitor the ideas and things and how it works out, and we'll continue to adjust them as needed. But for your own reference, for frequently asked questions, things of that nature, there's a link that's provided this PowerPoint, and it's all in the unmeeting doc that's guiding us this afternoon. So you can click on that to take a look. If you have any questions or clarifications that you need, there's a Q&A session at the end of the day. Today, after our Monday meeting, or you could just holler at one of our admin, email or phone, and we'll do our best to answer them and work together to make sure that we're kind of aligned so that we move towards a standards-based grading to do what's best for our kids. Thanks for watching.